Okay, thanks for coming tonight. Hopefully you are here to learn about animal or wildlife tracks and sign. Otherwise, you're going to hate me by the end of this session because I'm going to go into that in depth. And when I was asked to do a presentation, it was natural to just say, "Oh, I'll do it about tracks and sign," because I thought that would be easy for me. I've got tons of presentations about it. But when I came here, we got like 45 minutes to an hour, and I don't want to sit here and just go like, "Oh, this is a vole track, this is an ermine track, this is a whatever," because you're not going to remember all that stuff, and then you're going to walk out of here not learning anything from this presentation, and I want you to learn something. So I'm going to hopefully intertwine some of that identification stuff, but also give you the tools on how to learn about tracking, and we'll see what happens, see how it goes. Yeah, we'll see. I'm going to keep an eye on the time too, because I have a tendency to elaborate a little bit too much sometimes. So anyway, it's Reading Nature Story, and we're going to talk about how do we learn this stuff? How do we know what's going on in nature based on the evidence that is left out there? And I'm not going to read that whole thing. This paragraph that I have here from John Valant in his book called The Tiger, which is an awesome book. If you haven't read it, it's about a man eating a mer tiger in eastern Russia. And these people go and track this tiger down because it's killing villagers. And it's a pretty cool book. And he has some good quotes in there that I use. And when I first wrote an article about, and I used a quote from him, like the next day that I went out on the internet, I got an email from him saying, "Hey, Mike, I'd like to talk to you." And I was like, whoa. How'd this guy know that I used his thing? And he's probably got a Google search or a Google alarm. And I ended up talking to him, and he was really happy with what I wrote, thankfully. I thought I plagiarized him or something. So up in this, I just picked this picture here because it's not obvious what's there, but there's things like this all the time. These are actually very crystal clear tracks up there, just on a sandbar on the Tanana River. And pictures are really hard to see stuff, but just to point out, just on that sandbar, we have raven tracks here, coyote tracks, and then there's a really nice lynx track there. So I have a bunch of pictures in here that I'll try to point out different tracks. So I do work for the Department of Fish and Game and Wildlife Conservation Division. I'm an outreach and education specialist related to wildlife, and that includes a myriad of tasks that I have, everything from publications to creating education resources to social media and website development, huge amount of information. So fortunately for me, on a daily basis, I'm dealing with wildlife all the time. So I get to continuously learn every day of my life, so it's pretty cool. I am, like Althea was saying, I'll explain what that means, like certified tracker or whatever. I participate in this thing called CyberTracker conservation. As far as evaluations go, I'll explain that. I've been certified as a search and rescue tracker. I'm not really a tracker for fish and game because that's not really my job, but it does, that skill is value added, and it actually allows me to do some pretty cool stuff. So it is a very useful thing professionally. And I do teach classes about tracking and trailing. Oh, that picture, this is in South Africa, trailing rhinos. That is a rhino rub right there. So if you can imagine, it's hard to imagine how big a rhinoceros is, but that is them when they rub against a tree. So a quick note on CyberTracker conservation, because I really owe a lot to this organization for helping me develop my skills. CyberTracker is basically, it's an evaluation system. This guy, Louis Liebenberg, he created this symbol-based software so that illiterate bushmen could collect ecological data. So it's all symbol-based data collection. And through this process of him collecting this data, he would go to these communities and go who's the best tracker out here? And then people would be like, "Oh, I'm the best tracker," because that's what people say. They say it around here too. And so he'd give them the Palm Pilot, and they'd go collect the data. And then what he was finding out is man, that guy's not the best tracker, or that woman's not the best tracker. That guy or the woman that's not saying anything, sitting in a corner, is the best tracker. So he was in a conundrum, like how do I find out who's the best tracker and the best naturalist? So he created this evaluation system. And this evaluation system, it's an elaborate process of testing somebody's knowledge. It's like very objective. And this guy, Mark Elbrock, who wrote all these books here, and he's a pretty compulsive researcher too, he went to Africa, did the system, became a senior tracker and an evaluator, which is a phenomenal task. Like, it's a crazy task to do. Brought it to the US, and he started doing these in the US. So I just happened to come across this one day. I've been studying things my whole life, but I came across this thing one day when I was like, probably in the winter time, and I was browsing the internet, and I saw this evaluation system, and there was one in New England, and I'm like, whoa, I lived in New England. I know a lot about New England wildlife and plants, everything. I'm gonna go take this evaluation. And so I spent 2 days doing that, and I was like blown away by not the process, the learning process, and then the questions and the detail and the depth of information they got into, and the evaluators just blew my mind. So since then I was kind of hooked on this system, and I participate in it usually annually somewhere in the country or somewhere else. Okay, that's a long story. So when we talk about tracking, there's different things. There's track identification. That's one of the main things I'm going to focus on today. And that's just being able to identify everything out there. Can you identify what you're seeing on the ground? The other one is trailing. We call it trailing. That's in like the industry or whatever you want to call it. And trailing is following a string of sign or evidence to the animal that is making that track. Maybe a person, whatever it is. But it's not just following the set of footsteps or tracks, because a lot of times you have none of that is clearly visible. So you're following a set of signs to the maker. And they're separate evaluations too. And really you need to be good at both of those to be considered a good tracker. Here's a track and sign evaluation. Literally you spend 2 days, all day, 2 days, the evaluators go out, they mark things up, and you might ask 100 questions about all these different things out there. What made this? What animal is that? What foot is that? What nest is this? What feather is that? What bone is that? And it goes on for 2 days, and it's pretty intense, but the beauty is at the end of every grouping of questions, they have to explain to you what everything is. They have to prove that what they are saying is, because you could say, oh, that's not a marmot track. I know marmot tracks, that's not a marmot track. And they will have to prove to you why that's a marmot track. So it's an incredible learning experience. And the other one is the trailing part. And trailing is the same thing. For 2 days, you go out with a couple other people, a couple of evaluators, trailing evaluators, and they literally say, you might drive around dirt roads until you cut some trail. Might be elk or a deer or whatever it is. It depends where you're at. It could be like lions, and they'll say, okay, is that fresh enough to follow? And that's where you start. You've got to answer that question. And then if you say yes, they say, okay, go find it. And it's kind of a mind-blowing experience and a very humbling experience. If you don't know what you're doing, I've seen it, I've done it myself. I've stood there looking at the ground going like, man, okay, and spend an hour just trying to figure out, like say it was a group of elk. There's a group of elk that were around a dirt road. One of this evaluator, he's just like, go sort it out and go find where they went. And I spent an hour on that road just like with people waiting and sitting at the truck waiting for me to figure this out. And it's a very humbling experience, but it's very educational at the same time. You know, and you got to learn how to work through that stuff. It's all a skill set and practice. So why do we want to learn about this stuff? You know, why are you guys here? Hopefully it's to learn about what I'm talking about, but why? I found it's just people, it's an innate question in everybody. What is that? What is that? What is that? That's what kids want to know, adults want to know it. The problem is when you're an adult and you see something and you don't know what it is, it's a stumbling block. You look at it and go, I don't know. You either make something up and nobody challenges you, or you're just like, I don't know, and I don't have the time or the wherewithal to figure out what it is. So you move on, and you just never learn that, and that's fine. But if you want to know what it is, you got to put in the time. And what you get out of it is you get a sense of place, a sense of your environment. It enriches your experience in outdoors. It can be used for recording biological data. So there's a lot of science that uses transects and employs people that know about tracks for research. It's obviously useful for hunting and trapping because it allows you to know what animals are around and know what they're doing, know their behavior, and hopefully if you're an actual tracker, be able to go find them. And also helps you to stay safe. So what is that? Is that a moose on the trail? If it's in the wintertime? Is that a moose trail? Is it with a young? Is it with calves? Which way is it going? It's not that easy to decipher that, especially in our snow, our powdery snow. There's ways to figure all that out, but you just have to put in the time to learn it. Squirrel trail, red squirrel. Doesn't look like a red squirrel, really. But that's what they do in the wintertime. They change their gait in the wintertime, like a lot of animals do. And then here's a vole crossing that trail. So this is what we're going to do. Because of this, tracking has been likened developmentally to reading. So if you can get your mind into that, you have to learn letters and then put them together to make words and sentences. And ultimately, that's how you learn to write paragraphs and to develop this story that's out there. Oh, porcupine. Big long claws, big round pads, oval shaped pads. So I'm going to just give an example. I call this death in the meadow. Pretty dramatic, I know, but it is actually really dramatic. Because what's going on here? I ride my bike down right in Kramer's field, riding my bike along, and I put my brakes on as soon as I saw this. I'm like, whoa, this is crazy. That I'm seeing all this in one scene. And I got a picture of this whole scene, which I was very happy about. I was thrilled with myself. So why did I stop? Because this here is not the same as this here, is not the same as this here. Those are all three completely different trails going on. They're also very small, but there's a lot of drama going on with small animals, So I stopped and looked at that, and I was like, wow, that's pretty cool. I think I know what's happening. So I went and examined it, and so you see what I mean, like the gait or the distance between the groups of tracks is variable in all of those. So I went and looked closer, and I found that like the terminal end of this loop that's there, and something happened here, and some kind of disturbance and some kind of drama occurred there. So I figured it out, and this is what happened. A vole, all these animals live in the subnivean zone, underneath the snow, if you're not aware of that, all in the wintertime. A vole came out of the brush here, right at that point. It ran around this little hummock, but at the same time, a least weasel came out right after the vole came out. It probably chased them out of there underneath the snow. Came out, and he made a beeline to where the vole ended up coming to. And then this part here, if you know what these least weasel tracks look like, that is not a least weasel track normal trail. That is a least weasel with a big, huge vole in its mouth. So this is the actual scene where the killing occurred. And this is my chalk talk. I kind of imagined some of this, but that's what I believe happened. And literally the vole grabbed the least weasel grabbed the vole right there. They had a little bit of a struggle, probably bit into his neck and killed him there. And then he bounded off exactly back towards the hole with that vole in its mouth. And you could see, if you know what a least weasel looks like in a vole, it's dragging this thing out on the side of its mouth, because that is a least weasel. And that is a least weasel. That is a redback vole. That is a shrew. That is a piece of moose poop. So you can get an idea of the size of these things. So these little guys, we have the smallest carnivore in North America, the least weasel, and we have the Wolverine is the largest weasel in North America. And we have both of those. That is not an ermine. Ermine are about twice the size of a least weasel. And there's some least weasel tracks. They're all over the place, all over anywhere there's kind of wet, meadowy kind of areas. You just may not never notice their tracks. They're there. You got to know what they look like. So how do we get there? You know, you have to be inquisitive. That's the bottom line. If you don't care and you don't want to investigate, you're never going to learn anything. So the best ways that I can say is you have to build a naturalist database, really, in your head. Because you can know all of these technical things that I'll go over, the tracks and the pad size and all that. But if you don't know what possibly could be there, you're never going to have anything to draw from. If you didn't know there's least weasels here and how big they are, you'll never be able to figure that stuff out. So you have to study nature. Learn everything you can. And most really, the trackers that I hang around with, like all over the country and in different places like in South Africa, they know, we don't just go out and look at tracks, everything. They know, between somebody, everybody knows every bird call and plant that is out there. It's just a phenomenal experience. So hanging out with skilled people is another way. Trying to find mentors, that'll elevate things quite a lot. You know, if you're doing things on your own, I did like self-study for years of my life, and until I found this evaluation process and met some people that really brought me to a completely different level of learning. And using all your senses as well. It's not just about tracks on the ground. I threw bird language up there as an example because when you're tracking, you really have to listen to everything that's out there, squirrels, birds, because all of that stuff is telling you something if you know how to interpret it and how to read it. So here, I just put that up there. There's a robin sitting next to a great horned owl, right? And probably a lot of people have experienced this. You go outside, I went outside, I'm going to work, I hear robins just emphatically chirping, and I'm like, ah. And then I stopped and I'm like, man, you got to listen to that stuff. You know, slow down a little bit, listen. So I went around the corner where I heard the birds calling, and there's a great horned owl just sitting right there, and it was getting mobbed by these songbirds. So just little things like that. It gets a lot more serious in really dangerous situations where if you're tracking animals in Africa, some of those birds you have to listen to, like oxpeckers. If you're on a trail and you're quietly walking through the bush, trailing lion or leopard or whatever, and you hear an oxpecker, you have to say something about it, because if there's an oxpecker call, that means there's probably a big animal that could kill you right on the other side of the bushes. So it kind of brings it into reality really, really strongly, where in other places it may not matter so much, but when you get evaluated on trailing, you have to point out all of those sounds, or they'll, poof, you're getting failed for safety reasons alone. So, learning the alphabet. This is just another quick example. Some wolf tracks. You see, I'm out in the White Mountains, see some wolf tracks on the trail. You always see those, right? But then I started seeing some bounding trails through the deep snow. Like, well, okay, why are they bounding? Why are they bounding through the deep snow? There's a reason, because they really would prefer to be on the trail if they're traveling. So I want to know. I'm going to go investigate it. I follow one of those trails and come out to a meadow, giant, about the size of a football field, and it's completely trampled down by wolf tracks. There's no scat or anything there, though, so I'm like, wow, there was a lot of wolves hanging out here for quite a while. That's all I got out of that. But then continuing down the trail, I started seeing more bounding wolves off the trail, different wolves kind of on each side of the trail. And then ultimately we came across a whole bunch of scats and a whole bunch of beds and stuff. And these scats, they're not just your regular wolf scat. These are all like composed of meat and protein. They're not all full of hair and stuff. So that means that the animals had recently killed something. They were feeding on the meat and not scavenging too much yet. So continue on, just continue to follow those trails until this 4 feet deep snow literally came like a concrete sidewalk. You could just walk right on it, hard as a rock. We started seeing little signs of moose hair. There's a nice raven wing right here. So we just kept walking on that concrete pathway, and sure enough, we found this moose kill, which was pretty cool. And then you find a moose kill, there was probably like 10 or 12 beds around, wolf beds around it. And you could see by all this sinew that's kind of really loose and fibrous that have been scavenged by birds as well. So you can learn a lot just by doing these kind of exercises. And that's just right out there. It's not anywhere remote or anything. So resources, I would say, you know, there's all books are good, all tracking books. You can learn all different things from different ones. The best ones out there that I think the most extensive ones are, or the most thorough ones are Mark Elbrock's book, the Mammal Tracks and Sign book, and it's a pretty big book. And then he has one just on bird tracks and sign, so you can imagine the detail. Like they get into, some of the folks that I hang out with, they get into like individual bird tracks, like small songbird tracks. That's how engrossed they get into this stuff. There's also a really great app. It's called iTrack Wildlife. It's actually like a professional quality app you can get on your phone and take it out. I'm not, you know, you're not going to carry those giant books around with you. So, or you may, but you know, but there's a lot of resources out there. Anyway, so I'm going to look at the letters real quick, and this is all in books and stuff. So I'm going to go over this kind of quickly because you're going to not retain it all, and you're going to have to go look it up again anyway. So, but what to look for? The tracks. Things you're looking at is like the size and the shape, the symmetry of the track, and paying really close attention to the toes, the claws, the space between the digits, and the shape of this pad here, the palm pad or the metacarpal pad. And does it have any heel pads, you know? So all of those things become important when you start trying to distinguish species from each other. So fortunately for us, family groups have different characteristics to their foot morphology. So we can figure it out. It's not like mystery. It's not, so what we're looking for, and why is it important to know this? I'll give you one example. Someone sent me this picture at work, you know, and I'm like, oh, okay. I looked at it. You know, you got to look at things real closely. So I ended up deducing they were all Wolverine tracks, big and small. I showed it to a couple people, and they're like, no, that's not. Those aren't Wolverine tracks. Like, they're not all Wolverine tracks, anyways. And I was like, yeah, they kind of are. But how do you prove that to somebody? And the people like to attack you too. They're just like, whoa, okay. You don't have to get upset about it. So I proved it. You know, I went and drew every one of these where I could find this that pad shape. It's an irregular pad, and it's made up of a bunch of bulbous pads, and it's a weasel pad. They also have 5 toes. A lot of the times in weasels that enter the toe number 1, what will be our thumb, it's small and it's dropped down in the track and it doesn't show up. So you might just see 4 tracks. So, but I could prove that. So you have to be able to prove things. Here's another reason. Eyewitnesses, right? They're all usually right. And they all know what they're talking about because they saw this thing, right? Well, it's not true. But you can't just tell someone they're a liar. Because they're not really lying. That's an intentional thing. But they may be mistaken. So how do you tell someone gently they're mistaken? You explain it to them. So this person saw a Wolverine bounding across this beach where there'd never been a Wolverine seen before. Someone sent the picture. I'm like, well, all right, that's not a Wolverine. But I felt responsible to explain why it's not a Wolverine, because that's the way a Wolverine bounds or lopes. And I didn't want to just say, no, that's not a Wolverine, and just leave it at that, because then nobody learns anything. So I can look at this tracks, and the best way for me to do it is to explain the gait, that it's in a lope. I can point out the difference in the tracks. So front foot, hind foot. Wolverine tracks they're not very asymmetrical. The front and the hind are kind of close in appearance. This track, The hind feet are very different in shape, and the hind foot of a river otter, which this is way down low, or the toe, this inner toe, is really low, whereas in Wolverine tracks it's not that low. The nails, the toenails on otters are very much closer to the actual toe, and they're kind of pointy and sharp. Wolverines have longer claws. Some of these don't even show any claw marks, which Wolverines would do. So it was just like a systematic way to explain to someone, I'm sorry, you thought you saw a Wolverine, but the mind is not always the best thing to rely upon. That's proven in a lot of different things in life. So, another eyewitness, this person saw 3 mountain lions, and they went over and they took pictures of this track, and they brought it to a biologist down in south central Alaska. They sent it up to me. I looked at it, and they're like, no. I'm like, no, that's a canine track, very clearly. A canine track. It's got a triangular pad. It's got 4 toes. It's got toenails showing. So I'm like, I don't know what the person saw. I'm not going to say they didn't see a mountain lion, because I don't know that. But that is not what the mountain lion left if they did in fact see a mountain lion. That's all I could say. This here, earlier this summer, this spring, Chena Ridge. This one came, it was on Facebook on the Chena, anybody live up there? On the Chena group Facebook neighborhood thing. A bear was in the neighborhood, confirmed by somebody too, supposedly from Fish and Game. I don't believe that. But so I got this picture, and I'm like, nah, that's not a bear, quite clearly. It's 2 dog tracks, and inside of a shoe print right here. You can see the edge of the shoe, but it's just 2 overlapping dog tracks, and that can get confusing if you don't know the real specifics of the morphology. So this happens all the time, and yeah, it's just, you got to just know what you're talking about when you refute these things. So I'm going to give you an example of what I'm looking for. The weasel family, they have 5 toes on the front foot, 5 toes on the rear, just to make it complicated. Like I said, a lot of times that toe doesn't show up. So the claws are usually showing, and the track is usually a little bit asymmetrical. So even these scratch marks here, I can count 5 claws. They're asymmetrical. I know the size, about 1.5 inches, and they're in a group, showing the animals bounding. So I can conclude that that's a mink that made that. These ones down here, otter tracks. Again, see the front of the otter track the front track looks pretty symmetrical. The hind track has really got that toe way much lower. And you're seeing, actually you can see some webbing in here a little bit. And the real clue on that is their metacarpal pad is really odd shaped on weasels. So here's an example of a Wolverine, just to show you the variation in the tracks as well. And like if you didn't see this inner toe in this heel pad part there, a lot of people see that on a trail and probably just think it's a dog track and then don't give it any thought. But here's a Wolverine track up on the slope. That's a red fox track next to it, just for comparison. And then in the snow, a lot of times you really don't see a lot of pads, and you're going by the animal, the way that it walks, the gait, and you can just tell by the disturbances in the snow. Which around here in the wintertime, a lot of it is just clearly learning your gaits. So canines, just so we can distinguish canines, there's usually this classic X between the digits. They have a triangular shaped heel pad, and as soon as I say that, right here we have a wolf track, coyote track, and then this is a fox track. And one animal in the group always ruins everything. So fox tracks, one of the good things about them though, the way you can determine them from a coyote or a dog is they don't have a triangular shaped heel pad. They have this like chevron or bar shape. So that's like a clue for you, real good clue to help distinguish the fox track from other animals. Wolf tracks, they're really giant. They're huge. If you see one in real life, you're like, whoa, it's no question like, oh, that's a big track. No, it's like, whoa, that's a big track. 5.5 inches, 5 inches, depends on whether it's a female or a male. I just saw some giant wolf tracks yesterday, and I was like, wow. Every time I see them in real life, I'm like, wow, those are crazy. You're not mistaking them for a dog. Well, you could actually, but wolves, they have their gait is pretty narrow. Their trail width on them, they're usually in a trot of some sort, and their trail width is narrow. They also have very long legs relative to their size, so relative to other dogs too. So this is their stride length, which I measure from the 1 foot until that foot hits the ground again, because it gives you an approximation of the hip to shoulder of the animal. So you can get a kind of a size. But that is next to like an 80-pound lab right here. So see how long the stride is compared to like a dog with shorter legs. So those are clues that you look at. Their scat is giant. It's canine. It's twisted. It usually is full of hair and bones and stuff. Dogs, even dogs, I just saw one posted, a 140-pound like Burmese mountain dog, because I get millions of things, pictures and texts and whatever about tracks on Facebook and everything too. That track was like 4 inches long, even on a giant dog. The Great Dane and St. Bernard are probably on the bigger side of tracks, but they're rarely the kind of dog you see around here either. And as soon as I say that, I came across this track, and I was like, if I didn't see what happened, I would have been mistaken. I would have probably erred on the side of wolf on this one, but I happened to see this husky, and this guy was biking with it, and if I didn't see that guy biking with this husky, that was just like a 60-pound husky, and I went over, and of course, I looked at every track when I see a dog. I got to go look at it, and these tracks are huge, and I'm like, there's something wrong with that dog. It has to be interbred with, there's something about it. They just don't get feet that big. So it could have been bred with wolves somehow. I'm not sure. But it had disproportionate feet for the size of it, or even the fact that it was a domestic dog. So you got to be careful when you make your conclusions. Felines, they have this C shape. There's no X. You can't make an X with felines. This is a lynx track right here, kind of a faint one. This is another lynx track. You can see the 4 toes. There's no claws showing. Couple other things. The tracks are usually wide as long, where canines are oval shaped. The toes are teardrop shaped, and the metacarpal pad, or the palm pad, has 2 lumps in the front and 3 lumps in the back. So if you go home, if you have a cat, go turn your cat's paw over and look at it, and you will see this clearly. Whether it's an inch track or it is this big of a lion track, it's got those lumps on it. Now, as soon as I say that, there's always an exception, and it happens to be our cat, which is a lynx. So I'll show that in a minute. But generally in those cats too, all of these toes will fit into that pad. Like if you imagine taking them and plopping them in there, they'll all fit inside of there, except for in a lynx too. Okay, so like I say, this is a mountain lion track. This is actually a lion track. This is a lynx trail. Cats walk. Generally they walk, so their trail is wider. Dogs, canines, and ungulate stuff trot. They have that little bounce to them, and that makes their trail narrower. So you can keep that in mind. All these clues help to tell the story. Mountain lion. So this is the thing, because everybody, there's some report, it's like, oh yeah, I've seen a mountain lion somewhere. And that may be true. Like, I don't doubt there's some that have crossed the border and have been around and been seen. But as soon as that happens, everybody comes out and says, oh yeah, I saw a mountain lion and I saw a mountain lion. And the funny thing is that we have no evidence of it. Nobody's ever got a picture of it or anything. So I was just out in a remote community, no, I won't say remote, road community, and these guys were talking about all the mountain lions they see around the area. So my friend said, oh, did you get any pictures of them? Because it's like, well, really, if there's that many mountain lions around, somebody's going to get a picture. And they were like, no, they're fast, and by the time you can get your phone out, they take off. And I'm like, oh, all right. What about tracks or some kind of evidence? And there's really not much of it around. So how do we know that? Mountain lions, like in the cat family, here's a good example. They have a leading toe, just like in your hand. Dogs don't have that. Both dog toes, the two front toes, are parallel each other. They have that teardrop shape to the digits, and they have a really big palm pad proportional to the track, which is kind of roundish in overall shape. And so for a lot of those reasons you could tell. And even on a mountain lion, you could see the lobes in there pretty clearly, even in the snow, because they don't have heavily furred feet. So those pads push through and they show up. This was a sighting out near Nenana Ridge, like 2 years ago. And these people got these pictures and they're like, oh, I think that's a mountain lion because it's got this tail drag going on here. And they're big tracks. And the problem with it is that mountain lions don't drag their tail. And if you look at this track here, you see all the space in the small, relatively small pad size compared to the overall track? That is a lynx track. So it's just by looking at it, it's not really a question. Those are lynx tracks. This lynx was walking, probably with the hair dangling out of its mouth or some other prey item, and it was just dragging in the snow as it walked, and it has that rhythmic swing to it. So no mountain lion out at Nenana Ridge right now that we have evidence of. So this is one thing that people don't understand. When you see a big cat track, you can't just jump to the conclusion that it's a mountain lion because lynx tracks are as big or bigger than mountain lion tracks. So even though mountain lions weigh very much more, lynx, that's their adaptation. That's why they can run on the snow, and that's why their main prey item is snowshoe hares. So if you look at these lynx feet, they're pretty huge. It's a giant foot, 4-5 inches. And on the underside of that, it's completely furred. You can see no pads. That's why when lynx push down in the snow and on the ground, very little of their toes and their pad show up. And that's just another clue. Here's some lynx trails just to show you how wide. They're also wide because they're walking. Bears, 5 toes on each foot. Everybody is pretty familiar with what a bear track looks like, but keep in mind the hind foot and the front foot are different, and it pays off to know the difference in the feet. This is a black bear track here and a grizzly bear track here. I'll show you how to, because that's always a question. I figured I'd address it. Well, is it a black bear or a grizzly bear? It's big, so it should be a grizzly bear or whatever. Those are not good arguments because there's all sizes of both of the bears. So really the way to confirm it is by this line going through. If you can draw a line from underneath the inner or the outer toe across the front of that pad and all the toes are above that line, then it is a grizzly bear or a brown bear. If you try that same exercise and one of the toes gets cut off, usually that inner toe on a black bear, which drops down really low, then it's a black bear. And all that's what we're showing here is that black bears have a much larger curvature to their toes. And the other thing is claws. You can use the claws. Black bear claws are short and hooked. Grizzly bear claws, they're usually like at least a toe length longer. But if they're doing a lot of digging of roots or ground squirrels, then they can wear those down. So, and that's for the front feet too, okay? Not the hind feet. The hind feet are different. So here's a picture. What bear would you say? Okay. I would say that too, brown bear. First you got to know which foot is which, and that's the front foot right there, the long claws on it. That's the little proximal pad there. That's their main pad right there. This other track is a hind foot. And it's hard to see that sometimes, so you really got to look real closely. This track here, this is the front foot of what? Black. Okay, it's pretty clearly a black. It's a real good one. This toe here is dropped down pretty far. And the other thing is the widest part of the pad on these pads is the outside of the foot. And the smallest, lowest toe is always the inside toe. There's just another good black bear track. Good grizzly bear track, brown bear. You can learn a lot from here, how they're walking. This is a bigger bear with a smaller bear, probably a sow or a female bear with a cub. walking along. And then there's a lot of times like you see this on the ground. And this is actually a lot of evidence here, but you see these things and you may see just a little bit of, all that is the pad lifting a little bit of mud off of the ground, and it's leaving a little shape there. And there's another one. There's the heel of the back foot, and you can see some claw marks there, but it's enough there to tell you that it's a grizzly bear track. Hoofed animals, just obviously they have hoofs. How do you distinguish them from each other? It's most all the hoofs are different shape. In one way or another, they're different shape. Some of it may be subtle, but they have different shapes. You have to learn all those. One note I like to say is that the front and the hind feet are also very different. Front feet in most animals is larger than the hind feet. The dew claws, which are these things right here, those are those claws up on the leg a little bit. In ungulates, those dew claws are up there, and in the right conditions, they press into the ground and engage the whole foot in the ground. I've seen, I read a hunting book one time, in this moose guide said if you see dew claws in the track, it's written right in the book, then it's a bull moose. And I was like, well, that's not really true, because I've seen plenty of cows with dew claws showing, and even calves. It's all related to the substrate, what it is. Is it soft substrate and the speed that they're going? So either one of those can have an impact. The dew claws on the front feet are wider apart, and they are closer to the hoofs. And so here's a front track with the really wide dew claws. They're just barely cutting in. And this is a hind track with the dew claws being much more narrow. Rodents. Rodents are a couple of things just to keep in mind. When you see tracks and they look, the front foot and the hind track look very different, that's what a rodent track is. They have hind feet that usually have the heel on it and a big long foot, and then the front foot is very hand-like. It's got 4 toes only, and it's hand-like. So imagine most of our rodents, they do a lot of manipulating of objects with their front paws. Another good clue is if you look at this is a woodchuck track here. Rodents also have 3 parallel toes on the hind foot. So even if you just see a portion of this thing here, I don't even see the outer toes, because they're all parallel, I know that it's a rodent. And then I can look at the size and go, all right, that's a woodchuck. And this is a hind foot of a beaver, and that's how different the front foot of a beaver is. So you could be fooled into thinking it was a different animal if you didn't know that. And here is a red squirrel, just to show you the hind feet up here, because it's bounding, and it still has those 3 parallel toes in the hand-like front feet. Looking at birds, there's huge variation in bird tracks, so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about them, other than to show a couple of things, I just want people to realize that when someone looks at a track or sign on the ground and they tell you what it is, but it's really like, oh, how do you know that, It's really not a mystery or mythological, it's just there are ways. So I'm trying to point out a little of those little tricks. And I know this is a web-footed bird here because it has curved outer toes. That means it has webbing on it. Just simple little things like that. There's a waterfowl. I don't know what it is, some kind of waterfowl. This is a giant eagle track. These are actually, anybody want to venture to guess what they are? Don't say if you know me and I've told you. These are actually ptarmigan tracks. And ptarmigan walk through the soft snow. They compress the snow. All the other snow blows away, and they leave this pattern this walking pattern. You can see a little left and a right and a left and a right to the track. So those are just pretty cool. So learning family characteristics, I just want to point that out again. So even if you have 4 holes in the ground, if you know family characteristics, you can determine what this is. And that's because corvids, ravens, crows, jays, and magpies, they all have this structure where the 2 inner toes are stuck kind of together, and then that other toe is spread further off all by its lonesome. And they also have a long back toe as well. So just by looking at that, you can say, oh yeah, that's a raven. It's not a mystery, it's just knowledge. This is a cool track here. Same thing, owls, they have K-shaped tracks. So when you see these tracks, that's a great horned owl track, just on a sandbar. And the interesting thing about this is there's like an owl dance going on over here. And if you look closely at that track, is it the same owl? No, it's a different owl. So there, and this is in the fall where you got all those fledgling owls flying around screaming out real loud all night. So this is an adult owl, and this is one of the young owls. I don't know what it's doing there. It may have come in and fed it or something. And then there's also some mink tracks in here crossing. But that, you could look at that and say, oh, that owl tried to kill that mink, but that's not really what happened. It's in a different time. And then we have hares, of course. And these can be tricky because most people are used to seeing these hares in the snow. But when you see them, you can also see them in the dirt too. But really have a hard time trying to figure out what they are. Because they don't really have pads. They just have furred feet. And the pads don't show up. So you have this, and they're also giant. So here's a nice furry-footed hare in a silt bar. And this is a red fox next to it for a comparison. And you can see that bar right there, like proving that it's a red fox. And then here is another example. This is snowshoe hare tracks. And if you look back, snowshoe hare tracks, they're in a J shape. The toes are in the shape of a J. So all you need to see is like that J-shaped pinholes in the ground, and you can figure out that it's a hare, or rabbits are the same way, the whole family. Okay, so the sentence is, knowing the details of the tracks is imperative for figuring stuff out. So knowing that animals have different sized feet is really important. Knowing the gaits is important because it allows you to start interpreting what that animal's doing. That's why you need to know, is it a left foot, a right foot, a front foot, or a hind foot? Because without knowing that, you don't know what the animal's doing. And just as an example, here's a bear track. The left front foot, the left hind, the right front, the right hind. So bears normally walk in an overstep walk. So where they put their front foot, the hind foot lands ahead of that because they're moving along a little bit. So that's just their normal gait. So the hind foot should usually always be in the front, ahead of the front foot. If you look at this track, the right front, the right hind, and the left hind. So both of the front feet are down first, and the hind feet are landing beyond it, which means that it is in a gallop. It's galloping, yeah. So the behavior of these two animals, one's just walking naturally, the other one is galloping for some reason. You'd have to investigate why. So there's a lot of different gaits, and they all tell you something about what the animal's doing and how it's moving. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but some of the common gaits are walks, trots, and then it gets into really more fine detail where you can figure out whether the animal's stalking or is it walking faster or slower. Then there's lopes, the animals that bound or lope. Like this is a marten trail right here. The other clue with weasels, when weasels are in the snow, they change their gait and they usually put only two tracks down, and they land their hind feet where their front are. And they usually leave this on an angle, which helps you to determine that it's not something else. Gaits, this is just a galloping dog, basically a dog really moving out real fast. And you notice there's groups of tracks where the animal is airborne. Then there's hopping and bounding, so we have squirrels and hares, they hop and they bound. They actually when the front feet land in front, that is a hop. So flying squirrels do that a lot. Some other species do it. When they bound, the hind feet land ahead. So a little trivia, here comes Peter Cottontail. He's actually not hopping down the bunny trail. He's bounding down the bunny trail. And then even this one here, if you look closely enough in the mud and wherever, this is a hopping animal. We do have another hopper. What else hops? Frog. Yeah, so you can see those front feet are like this, and then they have those big white weird long toes with the kind of discs on the end. So that's actually a really good wood frog track right there. If you get into this and you want to take measurements, this is just about measurements. I don't think I need to go into detail about that. I do want to just quickly mention aging stuff, because there's a lot of stuff out there about aging, and you can't just be dropped off somewhere and figure out the age of a track. Like, you actually have to be in that area, because aging stuff is all about meteorology. It's all about what has happened in the last bit of time since that track was made. So was it sunny? Was it windy? Did it rain? All these different factors come into play, and you just have to put in time to practice that. And here, sticking your hand in rhino dung is one way to get an idea if you're on the trail. Are you getting any closer? So, this here is a grizzly bear track on a sandbar on a river here. You could look at that and go, oh, that's an old track, you know, because it's all washed away and faded. But that could have been made an hour ago. The only way you know that is if you're there, because if the wind's blowing, that can change in 5 minutes. I've seen tracks blow away in 5 minutes, literally. So you got to be careful with aging. It's very tricky. Okay, so we know lots of stuff now, and it should be easy to go out and figure everything out, right? But that's not the way that it works. And usually when you go out, you see like all this weird stuff. It's really hard to see just like perfect tracks everywhere. Sometimes you do, but a lot of times you don't. This was a head scratcher for me at one point, and I actually walked away from it, and I was like, nah, I'm spending too much time thinking about this, and then it came to me. All I see is holes in here, but I also see little texture pads, really like bird tracks, and I see, in my mind, I see some toes there and stuff. So I figured out after a little bit that it was a great horned owl that landed in the silt and grabbed a vole. So, I mean, it's really crystal clear once you figure it out. It is. It's like, oh, why did it take me so long to figure that out? Because it's poof right there. So okay, I'm getting close to winding down here. I want to talk about sign a little bit. Sign is everything else besides like a clear track. I'm going to go through this fast because I have about 5 minutes, and it's not really, you're not going to learn all this sign right now. I just want to show you an example of what is out there, and then you go out there, and everything that is out there that isn't normal was done by something, and your job is to try to figure that out. It gives you a lifetime of something to do. So this is the clearest sign you're ever going to find, Wolverine sign. And if you didn't know it, we have Wolverine up on Moose Mountain. So we don't really, but that's where this sign is from. There's also scat. Every animal scat is unique. So you can figure out every scat that's out there, whether it's from a bat to a moose or whatever. It's all out there. This is very common moose feeding sign on aspen trees in the springtime. They incisor scrape all the bark off. There's dead animals out there. There's parts of animals. This is very common for owls to leave the hind feet of hares. There's dens. There's feathers. There's kill sites. All kinds of cool things. This is one I will talk about because this is the most misdiagnosed scat, and the one that has probably caused like a lot of relationship failures and stuff. And debate is the difference between bear scat and moose scat. So I literally have people bring this in the office in a bag and go, what is this? And I made a Facebook post. You can look it up. It's called What's the Scoop on Moose Poop? It's got like 100,000 views on it. And that's for our page. We don't have that many people on there. But that's how important this diagnosis is. So moose, we know the nuggets. That's when they're eating wood in the wintertime. They literally eat twigs. And it comes out as sawdust. As soon as vegetation gets wet and they start eating the green stuff, because they basically starve on woody vegetation over the wintertime and they lose like a lot of body weight. As soon as green stuff comes up, they start eating it, moisture comes into their diet, and their pellets start getting wet and like amorphous. And eventually they're just these big clumps that people see and go, oh my God, there's a bear in our yard or whatever. And then they send pictures. So the best way that I could tell you to figure this out, moose have they're ruminants. They chew their cud, they digest it into very, 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 very fine material. So whatever comes out, that's what, if you break those things open, it's just a super fine consistency. There's not objects in it like you would see in a bear scat. I just said that, but recently some people have brought in some moose scats, and I'm starting to see like European bird cherry seeds in the moose scats now because they're browsing that bird, like the twigs in the wintertime, and they're getting some of those berries in there, I guess. So that's kind of interesting. And those are just the hard shells of the berry. All the other stuff is gone. It's just these like rock hard like husks or whatever they are. So it's kind of interesting. Bear scat, very simple digestive system. Something that goes in, part of that's coming out recognizable. So if you see berries and grasses and sedges and big bits of stuff, rocks, whatever it may be, that is a bear scat. This is just all forms. This is eating grasses, this is eating berries. This is just a giant pile of blueberries. Like you could pick them up and put them in your basket and take them home. And it's kind of like, why do they bother? I don't know. They get something out of that, but then they leave like a massive pile of blueberries. And this one here is actually eating all soapberry. That's why it's so red. So various moose sign from the browsing on alders, or eating the bark, rubbing antlers, feeding on leaves in the summertime, feeding on twigs in the wintertime. It goes on. Here's some cool stuff. That's moose sign. They came up and licked my truck one evening. They're licking all the soil off of my truck because they obviously needed some minerals. And then I stopped at some cut banks in the loess, and these are incisor moose scrapes, and they're eating the loess out of cut banks, which you would only know if you were like, wow, what is that marking there? And those are moose incisors, so you can learn a lot by being inquisitive. Bear sign, if you're ever out and see these aspen trees, all those black rake marks, that's from bears climbing up and down those trees in the springtime to eat the catkins on aspen trees. This is actually a birch tree, and those are probably some other like a cub escaping up a tree or something that's not feeding up there. And then this is a bonus sign. Those holes right there, those are woodpecker wells. And a lot of people think only yellow-bellied sapsuckers make those kind of holes, but you start looking at all the birch trees around here, and no, we don't have, I don't know if we may have had a rare sapsucker, but those are made by probably hairy woodpeckers. I've seen hairy woodpeckers licking out of these wells. Bear sign, like bears rub on trees, they reach back and chew trees, marking trees. This one chewed this tree right a half. There's hares. This is Hedysternum or Eskimo potato feeding, just bears digging up one root, making a big hole. Bird sign, this is a great gray owl, just plunge diving into the snow. It's a Lisa Beati picture. All of our grouse and ptarmigan snow roost, so they actually dive or burrow into the snow. They stay overnight. They break out in the morning. They leave a big pile of scat in there. If you go in there and grab the scat, you can figure out whether it was a ptarmigan or a grouse or all kinds of neat stuff. Redpoll feeding sign, that's kind of artwork to me there. Porcupine sign, there's completely denuded a tree there. Snowshoe hare sign, and like squirrel sign. This is a mystery sign for me because I found this last year, and it's a tight little ball of hair. And I asked 1 million people what they thought it was, and my friend thinks it's a cough ball from a lynx. But I asked everybody, have you ever seen perfectly round cough balls from any kind of cat? Nobody really had a good answer. That's my best answer, that it's I'm probably the only person that ever found a perfectly round lynx cough ball. So that's it. We could go on forever, but the real learning happens outside. So, and then I'm happy to answer any questions, and people can look at the track canvases out there. Oh, and I didn't mention, if there's any educators in the room, fishing game, we have a website specifically for teachers, all teacher resources. We have kits that you can check out, track kits, fur kits, skull kits, teacher guides. We have a whole wildlife curriculum about Alaska's wildlife, tundra and wildlife, forests and wildlife, Alaska's ecology. What else? We have a new magazine. We produce a kids magazine every year that you could sign up for. This one's about Alaska animal furs. Jen right there is working on getting this thing done and printed right now. So a phenomenal amount of resources to teach about wildlife for educators, homeschoolers, whatever it may be. And then I think I'm done, and I'll answer any questions.
Can you repeat the questions as they answer them so your mic will pick it up?
Sure, sure. All right, everybody knows everything? Great. Okay, yes.
What was that robin doing with that owl?
The robin was with a bunch of other robins that they were mobbing it. So when a bird of prey comes around, they ultimately take birds and take birds out of their nests, etc. So those birds, when they have the opportunity and the advantage, they mob it and try to chase it away. So you'll often see that different songbirds, but robins are pretty emphatic about it, trying to chase that owl out of their area, so it doesn't come kill them later. Yes.
Do red fox always put their rear foot into the front track so it looks like one thing?
Yeah, that's called direct registering, Yeah, so that's a good point because you see a left and a right and a left and a right. Animals have 4 feet. They have 2 on each side. So when you only see that pattern with 1 foot on each side, they're stepping in the same track. Most every animal does that in the wintertime, especially to conserve energy. Foxes probably do it more regularly, even not in the wintertime. Moose do it in the wintertime. A lot of things do it in the wintertime. And then in the summertime, it may be a lot more sloppy, yeah.
I have a question here. She wanted to know, on all 3 bear types, brown, black, and polar bear, the front and rear feet, how thick are their pads?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know actually how thick, because it depends on the bear. I'd probably say maybe an inch thick. I don't skin a lot of bear feet out, but it's pretty substantial. They're pretty thick, yeah. My friend Bob could answer that and be like, oh, 1.3 inches, or exactly. I don't know that exactly though. Yeah. Yes.
Do you get involved in tracking lost people?
No, I haven't done. I've done some training for search and rescue groups and stuff, but we don't. It's not really highly valued up here. Most of it's just not a highly valued skill, and mostly what happens with a lost person is tons of people and equipment goes out and tries to find them before a tracker. They're not going to call a tracker in and go, hey, can you figure this out? And then everything's a mess. Where in some places they do put a higher value on that, and if you send a tracker in there that's highly skilled, they can figure a lot of things out before you send 100 people through an area and trample the place down. So it's just not a big thing here, though. Yeah, I wish it was, because a lot of stuff, just being able to recognize, we'll start getting into trailing and stuff, trailing and those other skills. But if you have a dirt road, just an example, and a person can walk down a road and you may not see any tracks, and this has happened before. People have gone off the trail with a 4-wheeler and then disappeared, never been found again. If you have to recognize when something goes off the trail, because it leaves a sign and flag, we call it flagging and stuff, vegetation, something's broken, something's done, and it includes animals too. I've trailed animals down a road and never saw a sign for kilometers, and then all of a sudden it's like, whoop, there they go. You only know they leave the road because you see sign departing the road. You don't see it on the road. And so sometimes, those things are just not processed a lot, and being able to recognize that stuff. Yeah. Trailing and tracking, that's a whole nother ball game. It's a very completely different skill. But Dick.
You hear stories about grizzly bears marking trees by reaching up and clawing on the tree, maybe indicating dominance or something. I don't know how much is known about that, but the question is, do black bears do something similar?
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff coming out about that with all the trail cams that are out now and stuff, and there's a lot of I've seen a lot of evidence where there's trees that bears mark on, and when you see a game trail, Some of them have that ritualistic trail, and they're putting down scent with their feet. So when they get closer to their marking tree, they start stomping their feet and twisting a little bit, so you end up with these deep tracks in the dirt, and they're laying scent down, but I don't know exactly if that's specifically the dominant bear. I've seen video footage of all different bears rubbing on the same tree: grizzly bear, black bear, cubs, young bears, old bears. So there's probably a lot of variation in that. I don't know a clear answer. Yeah, but it's pretty interesting though. And I've seen black bear and grizzly bear hair on the same rub tree too. Yes.
Yeah, so I saw the bear hair on the tree. I guess with mammoths, you can get better DNA out of the hair than you can out of the bones. So I doubt it would work with coprolized dinosaurs with fossilized, but it might work with Pleistocene mammals. A lot of people are using DNA in the water to figure out what's there. Have you been able to use that on Pleistocene mammals or something like that?
I don't know about Pleistocene mammals or anything, but we use it for specific bears, studies with bear snare hairs to capture hairs specifically to do that, to identify individuals, And even now they can take the DNA from snow particles underneath the track and get the species of animal from that now too. So there's a lot of stuff going on with that.
There's no app for that yet.
No, there's no app. Yeah, no app for it.
In areas where red fox and Arctic fox overlap, is there any way to kind of guess what might be there?
You mean as far as the tracks, or just they do overlap, and red foxes are dominant species. They've extended their range way up north in the North Slope, but I think Arctic foxes fill a different niche there, but they're going after different things, and Arctic foxes are smaller and not as aggressive as red fox. But
So the gait would be different maybe?
oh yeah, the tracks of Arctic fox are smaller. The gait's different. Yeah. And unfortunately, I don't have a lot of Arctic fox stuff because I don't really get up there very often. Okay.
Any other questions?
Yeah, Jen.
One last question.
I would just say you guys should all follow the ADFMG Facebook page because Mike does Track Tuesdays sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes not enough, but yeah.
It's a good way to test your skills.
This Tuesday I was out getting all cut up, like busting through the brush, learning about wolves.
But usually at least once a month.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
a track and he'll give you a day to test your knowledge.
Yeah, and there's a Facebook page called Animals Don't Cover Their Tracks, and it's all track stuff every day. People send in pictures, and people have discussions about them. You just got to be careful on that page because a lot of people just say things like, "Oh, that's a dog," and they don't really. There's a lot of wrong answers on there, and people don't justify things, or explain it a lot. So you got to be careful.
Let's give Mike a round of applause.
All right.